My name is Marie M. Cohn. I'm 32, and I bought my selfish dad a luxury SUV for his retirement because I truly believe that if I made one grand gesture, something in him would finally soften toward me. My dad has always had this charm that draws people in, the kind that makes strangers laugh and makes relatives feel like they matter for a minute. But I learned early that the charm comes with a switch, and it flips fast if you get too close. Growing up, I lived with the fact that I wasn't one of the people he used that charm on. He had a way of undercutting everything I did. I could get a promotion, buy a house, fix something for him without being asked, and none of it ever really mattered. My younger sister, Megan Richardson, was the opposite in his eyes. She barely had to try. To be fair, she never played along, never chased his approval the way I did, but somehow that made it easier for him to give it to her. I always thought I just hadn't earned it yet. So when my dad announced he was finally retiring after 35 years in real estate, I figured this was my chance. I'd been doing well. My business was finally taking off after years of struggling. And I wanted to do something big, not to buy love or respect, but maybe to say, look, I did it. Maybe you can see me now. He'd always talked about this particular SUV, one of those luxury models with a name that sounds like a spaceship. He said it was the only car worth having, but he would never buy it because men earn what they drive. I ordered it 3 months before the retirement party and had it delivered to the restaurant with a big red ribbon and everything. I told the valet to wait until dessert. Everyone was there, our whole family, some of my dad's old coworkers, Megan and her fiancé, even my mom, who somehow is still playing peacekeeper after all these years. The dinner actually went well. People joked around. Toasts were made. For a moment, I almost let myself believe that this time would be different, that maybe he would stand up and say something that sounded like pride. When it was my turn, I got up last. I said a few words about his work ethic, the example he set, and how I hoped the car would help him enjoy his retirement. I watched faces as I spoke, relatives smiling politely, coworkers nodding like they were watching a ceremony. I told myself to keep my voice steady. I told myself not to sound like a daughter begging. Then the valet rolled in the SUV keys on a small tray, and there was a ripple of excitement around the table. Someone gasped. Someone laughed. My mom's eyes widened, like she couldn't believe I'd actually done it. My dad looked satisfied, like the universe had finally remembered who he was. He stood up. He raised his glass. He looked right at me, and for a heartbeat I thought I was about to get what I'd been chasing my whole life. Then he smiled in that way he does when he knows he has an audience, and he said, "Let's drink to my stupid daughter who thinks that by buying me a car, I'm finally going to respect her. That's funny." Then he sat down like it was nothing, like he hadn't just dropped a grenade in the middle of my chest. The table went silent. All relatives were frozen, waiting for some kind of reaction from me. Megan didn't even look up. My mother blinked and reached for her wine like she could drink her way into pretending she didn't hear it. One of my dad's old coworkers gave me this awkward half smile like he wasn't sure if it was a joke or not. And in that quiet, I felt something shift so cleanly it almost felt peaceful. I didn't argue. I didn't try to explain. I didn't raise my voice or demand an apology. I quietly left. In the parking lot, I called a tow truck. I told them to pick up the SUV and bring it back to me. The valet looked confused when I walked back in to give instructions, and I handed him an extra 100 and told him not to ask questions. I drove home with my hands steady on the wheel, the kind of steady that only comes when something inside you finally stops hoping. I didn't feel anger. Not yet. I didn't feel shame either. What I felt was clarity. The SUV was in my driveway before midnight, sitting there under my porch light like a monument to something I should have understood years ago. It looked better there anyway. The next morning, I woke up to 20 missed calls from my father. He started texting, short messages at first, then longer ones, like he was building momentum, like he believed if he kept pressing hard enough, I would fold. I ignored them, made coffee, and stared at the SUV, as if it could explain why I ever thought a gift could change a man who built his whole personality on humiliation. Just before noon, Megan showed up at my door. She didn't even knock. She walked in, closed the door behind her, and said, "You won't believe what he's doing." My sister had never shown up at my house unannounced before. Megan stood in my entryway, holding her phone like it was something dangerous, her face pale as if she'd just come from a funeral. She didn't sit down, didn't make small talk. Didn't even ask if I was okay. She just said it again, quieter this time, like she couldn't believe the words were real. You won't believe what he's doing. Then she handed me her phone without another word. It was a group chat with our dad, our mom, Megan, and a couple of uncles. The first thing I saw was a picture of the SUV sitting in my driveway. The angle was too close, too personal, like whoever took it was standing at the edge of my property. Underneath the photo, my dad had typed, "Marie just proved she doesn't respect family. That car was a gift. She's lucky I don't call the cops." I stared at the screen, waiting for my brain to catch up to what my eyes were reading. Another message popped in while I was still holding the phone. "We need to talk or things will get ugly." I looked up at Megan. "He followed the tow truck," I said, because the only way he could have taken that picture was if he had. Megan nodded once, tight and certain. "He waited outside the restaurant," she said. "Then he followed it to your house. He's been driving by since last night." She swallowed like she was trying to keep herself steady. "Marie, he's saying you stole it." I laughed at first. I couldn't help it. The absurdity hit like a fever dream. He humiliates me in front of the family, calls me stupid for thinking a gift could buy respect, and then he turns around and claims I stole the gift when I take it back. It was so crazy my body responded with a laugh before it could respond with anything else. But Megan didn't smile. She looked at me like I was missing the point. "He's serious," she said. "He called Uncle Jared this morning and told him you're unstable, that you've always resented him, that you tried to humiliate him in front of the family." I scrolled up through the chat. The story my dad was telling was a complete rewrite. According to him, I stormed out in tears, yelled about being disrespected, then took the SUV and threatened to sue. He framed himself as the wounded patriarch, the generous father betrayed by an ungrateful daughter. It was the same trick he'd used my entire life, only now he had a bigger audience and a better stage. Then Megan said something that made the laughter die in my throat. "You should be careful," she said. "He's not just angry, he's planning something." I stared at her. "Like what?" Megan hesitated, like she didn't want to be the one to say it out loud. "He's been calling people," she finally said. "He talked to your landlord, your office. He even called Mom's friend at the city permit office." "For what?" I asked, but I already felt the answer coming. Megan's voice dropped. "He told her he thinks you're committing tax fraud," she said, "that you're using your business for shady deals." I stared at her, my chest tightening in a way that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with disbelief. "He's actually trying to ruin me," I said. Megan nodded. "I'm not guessing," she said. "He said it like he was proud of it." I was still processing that when my phone buzzed. A voicemail from my office manager. I hit play, and her voice came through, nervous and clipped. "Hey, Marie. Just wanted to give you a heads up," she said. "Someone claiming to be from the IRS called and asked about your business records. They knew things they weren't supposed to know." The room went quiet around me. Megan watched my face like she was waiting to see if I'd break. I didn't. I just sat there with the phone in my hand, realizing in real time that this was never about a car. The SUV was just the spark. This was about control. At dinner, my dad didn't just humiliate me. He performed. He made himself the center of the moment the way he always does, and when I walked out, I took away the ending he wanted. For once, he wasn't the star, and he couldn't tolerate that. So he did what he's always done, only louder, meaner, and with more people watching. Megan took a step closer. "He followed the tow truck like you were a criminal," she said. "He's telling people you're unstable. He's calling your office. This isn't going to stop on its own." She paused, then added, almost reluctantly, "And Mom isn't stopping him." That landed harder than everything else, because I could handle my dad being cruel. I'd been trained for that, but my mom had spent years in the role of peacekeeper, the quiet buffer, the woman who smoothed over the mess and told me to be the bigger person. If she was helping him now, even passively, then there was no safe corner left in this family. I set my phone down and stared at the SUV through the front window. It sat there immaculate and expensive, like a trophy that had turned into evidence. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who believed if she kept proving herself, if she kept achieving and giving and sacrificing, he'd eventually look at her with pride. And I felt something inside me go cold, not hate, not rage, something sharper, something final. Here's what my dad didn't realize. I had been prepared for this. Maybe not this exact explosion, but something like it. I'd spent years hoping he'd change while quietly documenting everything that never felt normal. Screenshots, emails, voicemails, even an old message from him basically bragging about writing off fake expenses when he was still working. Back then, it felt like insurance, a way to remind myself I wasn't crazy, that the way he treated me wasn't normal. I never intended to expose him. I never planned to use any of it. I didn't want a war. I wanted a father. But he wasn't coming for my feelings anymore. He was coming for my life, my work, my name. And that kind of attack doesn't end with an apology. It ends when the person attacking you no longer has the power to do so. I looked at Megan. He wants to play dirty, I said quietly. Megan raised an eyebrow, like she was trying to read whether I was bluffing. You got something, she asked. Oh yeah, I said. And if he wants a war, he's about to find out how much I've been holding back. And I wasn't just talking about him, because something about the way this was unfolding, the speed of the calls, the knowledge people suddenly had about my business, the way he knew exactly where to aim, told me there was someone else feeding him behind the scenes, someone giving him details, someone helping him tighten the net. I just didn't know who yet, but I was about to find out. I didn't go to work that day. There was no point pretending I could focus on invoices and meetings while my father was actively trying to dismantle my life. After Megan left, I locked the door, pulled the blinds halfway down, and sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open, staring at a folder I never thought I would actually use. For years, I'd kept it buried deep in my files, labeled with something boring enough that no one would ever click on it by accident. Back then, I told myself it was just in case, just proof that I wasn't imagining things, proof that the man everyone else adored wasn't the man I grew up with. Inside were screenshots of text messages he'd sent when he thought no one was watching. Emails where he bragged about bending rules in his real estate deals. Voicemails where his voice slipped, where the charm dropped, and something colder took its place. There were questionable invoices, copies of contracts I knew were fake, and one message from years ago where he casually joked about writing off expenses that never existed. I never planned to use any of it. Keeping those records felt like insurance, not ammunition. But insurance only works if you're willing to file a claim. I sat there for a long time, not scrolling, not clicking, just breathing. Because once I crossed this line, there was no going back. If I sent any of this into the world, I wasn't just defending myself anymore. I'd be changing the story my family had been telling about him for decades. I thought about the voicemail from my office manager, the IRS call, the way he'd followed the tow truck like I was a criminal. That was when it became clear. He'd already crossed his line. I was just late to acknowledging it. I picked up my phone and called Sasha. We'd gone to college together, back when neither of us knew where life would land us. Now she ran a forensic accounting firm and had cleaned up enough financial disasters to recognize one before it went public. I didn't soften it when she answered. I told her I needed her professional opinion, and I needed it fast. I emailed her the entire folder while we were still on the phone. 15 minutes later, she called me back, and her voice was different. Gone was the casual familiarity. Marie, she said, this isn't just messy. This is prison chaos. Those words landed heavier than anything my dad had said. I asked her what that meant in real terms. She told me that if even half of what I had was accurate, it could trigger audits, investigations, and serious legal consequences. I told her I didn't want to go straight to the police, not yet. I wanted him uncomfortable first. I wanted the walls to close in slowly. I asked her to prepare a summary file, something clean, factual, and terrifying enough to make him sweat. Something I could leak anonymously to the people who mattered most to him. His former business partners, the state licensing board, a few carefully chosen contacts at the country club he loved to brag about. Sasha didn't hesitate. She told me she'd have something by the end of the day. While she worked, Megan came back. She looked worse than she had that morning, like the ground under her had shifted too. She didn't sit down. She just stood in my kitchen, scrolling through her phone, her thumb moving too fast. You need to see this, she said, and turned the screen toward me. It was another group chat, a different one, just Mom, Dad, and Megan. I recognized my mother's tone immediately, the way she writes when she thinks she's being helpful. She'd sent my dad my old utility records, account numbers, the post office box I'd set up for my business years ago. She wasn't guessing. She had access. and she was handing it to him like tools. I felt something crack that I didn't know was still holding. All my life, I'd told myself my mom was passive, that she stayed quiet because she was afraid, or tired, or trying to keep the peace. But this wasn't passive. This was intentional. This was choosing a side while pretending she wasn't. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I just stared at the screen until the truth settled in my chest like a weight. If I was going to survive this, I couldn't pretend I had allies where I didn't. I got up and went to my home office, opened another folder, one I'd named Backburner years ago. Inside was the deed to a piece of land my father didn't know I owned. 7 years earlier, I'd bought it quietly from a developer who never built on it. The land sat just outside the town where my dad grew up. It used to belong to my grandfather before my dad sold it off when he needed cash. He talked about that sale like it was his biggest regret, the place he wanted to retire to someday, build a cabin, leave a legacy. He never knew I bought it back. As I stared at the deed, a different kind of plan began to take shape. This wasn't about revenge, it was about leverage, about showing him, in a language he understood, that his myth of control had limits. I picked up the phone and called the county office, asked about survey flags, access roads, development permits. I told them I was considering building a workshop, maybe a gate. I asked if I'd need public notice if the access road ran close to a neighbor's property. The woman on the phone laughed lightly and said not unless the neighbors planned to cause trouble. I smiled to myself and thanked her. When I went back into the kitchen, Megan was still standing there. I told her calmly that I wasn't going to war with him. I was going to dismantle him piece by piece. She looked at me for a long time, then asked the question I knew was coming. "What if he tries to fight back?" she said. "That's what I'm counting on," I replied. 3 days later, my father showed up at my house. He didn't knock. He parked his car right behind the SUV he still called his, and walked up to my door in full golf gear, like he owned the place. I only opened the door because I wanted to see how far he'd take it. The first thing he said was, "You think you're smart, don't you?" He grinned like he was enjoying himself. He told me he'd heard I'd been making calls, stirring up old garbage. He warned me not to go against my own blood. I didn't answer. I let him talk. That's when he stepped closer and said, "If you're going to do this, you better hope you've got nothing to hide." He didn't know that while he was standing there bluffing, the summary Sasha prepared had already gone out, carefully, quietly, to every contact that mattered. The real estate licensing board, the IRS tip line, former partners who knew exactly what they were looking at. I didn't need him to fall that day. I just needed the dominoes to start tipping. And they already were. The first domino fell faster than I expected. By the time my father pulled away from my house in a spray of gravel and wounded pride, my phone was already lighting up with messages I didn't answer. Former business partners, old contacts, people who hadn't spoken my name in years. I let them all go to voicemail. I didn't want to hear sympathy or outrage yet. I wanted the pressure to build where it mattered, in the places he thought were untouchable. The next move wasn't loud. It was deliberate. 2 days after Sasha confirmed the summary had been received by the right people, I drove out to the land I owned outside my father's hometown. It was quiet there, the kind of quiet that makes you feel small in a good way. I stood at the edge of the road and looked at the property line markers, the ones my father used to talk about like they were sacred. This land had been his dream once. He'd sold it when he needed cash, told himself he'd buy it back someday. He never did. I had. Quietly, without telling anyone, and now it was time to use it. I scheduled the delivery of a 40-foot steel shipping container. Bright orange. Impossible to miss. The driver asked me 3 times if I was sure about the placement, pointing to the curve of the road that passed by the back entrance of my father's old vacation property. I told him I was sure. I wanted it right there, bolted to concrete pads, solid and immovable. Not blocking his driveway, not trespassing, just existing in a way that disrupted the illusion he'd built his life around. I didn't want to block access. I wanted to block the story. When the container hit the ground, I felt it in my chest. The vibration traveled up through my boots like punctuation. This was real. This was happening. I stayed until the crew finished anchoring it, signed the paperwork, and drove away without looking back. I didn't need to see his reaction yet. I already knew what it would be. I got the picture later that afternoon. A friend who lived nearby sent it to me without commentary. My father standing in front of the container, arms out, mouth open, mid-rant, a sheriff's deputy beside him holding a map. The caption under the photo said everything it needed to. He says it's his land. Deputy says it's yours. I stared at the image for a long time, not with satisfaction, but with something closer to closure. For the first time, the law wasn't bending around him, the charm wasn't working, the map didn't care who he was. That night, Megan called me. She'd gone to our mom's house to confront her about the records she'd shared. Megan expected tears, maybe an apology, maybe the usual speech about keeping the family together. What she got was worse. Our mom didn't deny it. She told Megan that I'd always needed limits, that she and Dad knew I'd act out eventually. Act out. Like I was a child throwing a tantrum instead of a grown woman defending her life. Megan told me her voice shook when she said it, not with anger, but with disbelief. It was the moment she stopped trying to understand our parents and started protecting herself. The next morning, my father tried again. He showed up at the container site this time, not at my house, as if confronting the object would somehow restore his authority. I was already there, leaning against the steel, waiting. When he saw me, his face twisted into that familiar mix of rage and performance. He told me I'd embarrassed him, that I was making a fool of myself, that people would forget I ever mattered once he was done. I listened without interrupting. When he finally stopped to breathe, I told him quietly that I wasn't trying to be remembered by him. I was trying to be free of him. That was when I saw it. Not anger, not arrogance, fear. Real fear, flickering behind his eyes for half a second before he masked it with a laugh. He warned me again that I didn't know what he was capable of. I told him I did. That was the difference between us now. He left without another word, and I knew he was already planning his next move. It came the following day. My old high school principal called me, awkward and apologetic, to say someone claiming to be from a newspaper had asked about my disciplinary records that didn't exist. Then my business inbox filled with strange inquiries, fake customer requests, and a handful of threats that felt manufactured. I traced one of the IP addresses back to a VPN subscription I recognized immediately. One I'd helped my father set up years ago. He wasn't just trying to hurt me anymore. He was trying to erase me. Then the city zoning office contacted me. Someone had filed a complaint claiming the container was a hazard and obstructed a historic easement. I sent them everything. Proof of ownership, survey maps, documentation showing the easement didn't apply. I didn't add emotion. I added facts. The city official laughed softly when she called back. She said it sounded like someone didn't like my new perspective. She told me I was in the clear. That evening, Megan texted me again. "Can we talk?" she wrote. "I found something you need to see." I told her to come over. When she arrived, she didn't sit down. She held an envelope in both hands, like it weighed too much. She said she'd found it hidden in Mom's closet, folded and tucked under a stack of old tax records. It wasn't addressed to anyone. It wasn't marked. But it was old, and the first line stopped my heart. I never wanted a daughter. I didn't open it right away. I looked at Megan, at the way her eyes were already red, at the way she was bracing herself like she expected me to fall apart. I took the letter from her carefully, sat down, and unfolded it slowly. The words inside weren't angry. They were precise, cold. It talked about power, about how daughters stay grateful and sons challenge authority, about how my success wasn't admirable, it was threatening, how I looked at him like I could see through everything he'd built, how that terrified him. By the time I finished reading, I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I was calm in a way that scared even me. Because for the first time, I wasn't trying to understand him. I was done explaining him away. I scanned the letter, added it to the file I'd already prepared, and titled the folder Bridge, because this was the last thing I would ever send across it. I didn't write a message. I didn't add context or commentary. I sent the file to the entire family, to his former business contacts, and to the state board. Facts only. Evidence only. I wanted them to see him without the charm, without the filter, without my voice, softening the truth. When I hit send, I felt lighter than I had in years. An hour later, the calls started. Relatives asking questions, old partners demanding explanations. My father left the family group chat and blocked my number, but the silence that followed wasn't peace. It was collapse, and I knew deep down that he wasn't finished yet. Men like him never stopped trying to regain control. They just changed tactics. The first person to show up wasn't my father. It wasn't a lawyer either. It was Mark Hensley, the former business partner my dad liked to pretend never existed. He knocked once, waited, then stepped inside when I opened the door like he'd been invited years ago. He looked older than I remembered, but steadier too, like someone who had already survived the worst of what my father could do. He handed me a thick envelope without ceremony. Inside were notarized forms, witness statements, and financial records he'd kept for over a decade, not out of spite, he said, but because he knew someday the truth would matter. "He's done," Mark told me quietly. "He just doesn't know it yet." Before he left, he paused at the doorway and warned me that my father would try one more thing, something desperate. I nodded. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was ready. The next day, the cease and desist arrived. Typed, formal, and empty. My father accused me of slander, libel, and emotional distress, demanding I retract everything immediately. I read it once, then handed it to my attorney. She didn't even finish the first page before she laughed. She told me he had no case, and that if he ever tried to push this into court, the letter, the voicemails, and the financial records would bury him faster than any audit ever could. We filed a short response. No emotion, no apology, just a refusal. Then came the twist I hadn't prepared for. Megan called me late Friday night, her voice small in a way I'd never heard before. She told me to check my email. What I found there wasn't from Dad. It was from Mom. A scanned, handwritten letter, careful and hesitant, like every word had been debated before it was written. She apologized, said she thought she was protecting the family, said she never imagined things would go this far. I read until one line stopped me cold. "I'm sorry about the letter," she wrote. "I knew about it, but neither your father nor I wrote it." I called Megan immediately. She was quiet for a moment before telling me she'd spoken to Aunt Lorraine. Years ago, my dad had mentioned writing a letter just in case. Something he could use if things ever went wrong with me. A letter designed to look old, to look real, to shatter me if it ever surfaced. He planted it where he knew someone would eventually find it. Someone like my mother. Someone who would leak it at exactly the right moment. For a moment, it worked. I won't pretend it didn't. That first line cracked something in me. But then the pieces came together, and the truth landed heavier than the lie. He hadn't just tried to control my present. He'd been engineering my collapse for years. The audit notice arrived 2 weeks later. 3 weeks after that, Megan moved out of our mom's house and into a small apartment she paid for herself. She started therapy. I helped with the security deposit, not because I felt responsible, but because she asked honestly, without entitlement. It was the first time our relationship felt real. I donated the SUV to a local charity, not out of spite. I just didn't want it anymore. I didn't want anything that reminded me of trying to earn something from someone who never had anything worth giving. The shipping container stayed for a while. Then I applied for a permit to turn the land into something else. A quiet memorial garden. Not for him, for me. A place no one could rewrite. I haven't heard from my father since. No calls, no threats, no apologies. His silence isn't peace, but it's final. And that's enough. Because when the dust settled, I understood something that took me a lifetime to learn. I was never asking for too much. I was just asking the wrong person. And the moment I stopped asking, I finally became free.